What happens when a royal guest completely loses control on live television, attacking one of America's most beloved morning show hosts with shocking personal insults? In just 37 seconds, Prince Harry went from composed interview subject to unhinged antagonist, unleashing a verbal assault so vicious that producers had no choice but to cut the cameras and remove him from the studio. The Today Show studio buzzed with its usual morning energy as Savannah Guthrie settled into her chair, reviewing her notes one final time. Across from her sat Prince Harry, fidgeting slightly as makeup artists made their final touches. The interview was supposed to be a straightforward discussion about his latest charitable initiatives, but something felt different today. Harry's demeanor seemed colder, more defensive than usual. "Good morning. I'm Savannah Guthrie, and we're here with Prince Harry to discuss his upcoming projects and recent statements." Savannah began with her signature warm smile, looking directly into the camera before turning to her guest. "Thank you so much for joining us this morning." Harry nodded curtly, his jaw already tense. "Thanks for having me, I suppose." The response caught Savannah off guard. In all her years of interviewing, she'd learned to read the subtle signs when a guest might be difficult, and every alarm bell was ringing, but she pressed forward with professional grace. "Let's start with your recent charity work. You've been quite vocal about various causes lately. Can you tell our viewers what's driving your passion for these particular issues?" Harry shifted in his seat, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Well, Savannah, I think what's driving my passion is the fact that someone needs to speak truth to power in this world. Too many people, especially in media, are content to just ask softball questions and never challenge the real problems." The comment was clearly directed at her, and Savannah felt the temperature in the room shift. Camera operators exchanged glances, and she could see her producer off to the side looking concerned. But Savannah had handled difficult guests before, and she wasn't about to let this derail the interview. "That's certainly admirable," she replied diplomatically. "Speaking of challenging problems, there have been some questions raised about the funding sources for your foundation. Can you address those concerns for our audience?" Harry's face darkened immediately. "Questions raised by who, exactly?" "By tabloid journalists who have nothing better to do than tear down people who are actually trying to make a difference? I find it interesting that you'd bring up unsubstantiated rumors on national television." "These aren't rumors, Harry. These are legitimate questions being asked by financial oversight organizations. I think our viewers deserve transparency when it comes to charitable foundations, don't you?" "What I think," Harry said, his voice rising slightly, "is that this interview is starting to feel like an ambush. Is this really what American journalism has become? Gotcha questions designed to tear people down rather than actually inform the public?" Savannah maintained her composure, though she could feel the hostility radiating from across the table. "I'm simply asking questions that I think are fair and that our audience would want answers to. That's what journalism is about, providing information so people can make informed decisions." "Informed decisions?" Harry scoffed. "You mean like the informed decision your network made when they decided to platform conspiracy theories about my family? Or the informed decision to give airtime to people who have made careers out of attacking us?" The accusation was completely unfounded, and Savannah knew she had to address it head on. "Harry, I think you're conflating different issues here. We've always tried to cover your family story fairly and with respect, but part of that fairness means asking legitimate questions when they arise." "Fairness?" Harry's voice was getting louder now, and staff members around the studio were starting to look nervous. "You want to talk about fairness? Let's talk about how your network has treated my wife, how they've amplified every piece of negativity while ignoring all the positive work we've done. I understand you feel strongly about how your wife has been covered in the media, and those are valid concerns. But right now, we're here to talk about your current projects and initiatives. Can we focus on that?" Harry stared at her for a long moment, his breathing becoming more labored. Something had clearly snapped inside him, and the professional facade was cracking rapidly. "You know what, Savannah? I'm getting really tired of people like you pretending to be neutral when you're clearly not. You sit there with your fake smile and your prepared questions, acting like you're some kind of objective journalist, but we both know what this really is." The personal attack sent a chill through the studio. Savannah had been called many things in her career, but never had a guest been so openly hostile and disrespectful on live television. She took a deep breath, determined to maintain her professionalism even as the situation spiraled out of control. "Harry, I'm not sure what you mean by that. I'm here to have an honest conversation with you about issues that matter to our viewers. If there's something specific you'd like to address, I'm happy to listen. What I'd like to address is the fact that this entire interview is a setup. You brought me here under false pretenses, promising to talk about my charity work, And instead, you're trying to turn this into some kind of scandal. This is exactly the kind of behavior that drove us out of Britain in the first place. The comparison to his departure from royal duties was clearly meant to be dramatic, but it only served to highlight how disconnected from reality Harry seemed to be becoming. Savannah could see her producer gesturing frantically off camera, likely debating whether to cut to commercial. "Nobody set you up, Harry. These are standard questions that any public figure involved in charitable work should expect to answer. Transparency builds trust with donors and supporters." "Trust?" Harry laughed bitterly. "You want to lecture me about trust? Coming from someone who works for a network that has spent years undermining my family's credibility? That's rich, Savannah. That's really rich." The irony of a member of the royal family lecturing an American journalist about credibility was not lost on Savannah, but she refused to take the bait. Instead, she tried one more time to steer the conversation back to productive territory. "Harry, I think we may have gotten off on the wrong foot here. Why don't we start over and talk about the positive impact your foundation is having? I know our viewers would love to hear about the communities you're helping." But Harry was beyond redemption at this point. His face had turned red, and his hands were clenched into fists on the table between them. "Start over? Start over? Do you think I'm some kind of fool, Savannah? Do you think I don't see what's happening here?" "I honestly don't know what you think is happening," Savannah replied, her patience finally beginning to wear thin despite her professional training. "I invited you here to discuss your work, and you've spent the entire interview attacking me and my network instead of answering basic questions." "Basic questions?" Harry's voice cracked with incredulous anger. "You call attacking my family's integrity basic questions? You call spreading malicious gossip basic journalism? This is exactly why traditional media is dying, because people like you have forgotten what real reporting looks like." The accusation stung because it was so fundamentally unfair. Savannah had built her career on thorough, honest journalism, and she wasn't about to let anyone, royal or otherwise, impugn her integrity on national television. "Harry, I need to stop you right there. I have never attacked your family's integrity, and I have certainly never spread gossip on this program. What I have done is ask you legitimate questions about your public activities, which is my job as a journalist. If you're not prepared to answer those questions, then perhaps we should end this interview." The suggestion that the interview might end seemed to trigger something even deeper in Harry's psychological state. His eyes widened with what looked like genuine panic, as if the thought of being held accountable for his behavior was completely foreign to him. "In the interview? In the interview? You're gonna cut and run the moment someone challenges your narrative? This is exactly what I'm talking about, Savannah. You media people are all the same. You dish it out, but you can't take it when someone fights back." "I'm not cutting and running from anything," Savannah said firmly, her voice still calm but with an edge of steel that her regular viewers would recognize. "I'm pointing out that this interview was supposed to be about your charitable work, and instead you've spent 15 minutes making personal attacks and unfounded accusations. Our audience deserves better than that. Our audience deserves the truth," Harry shouted, his voice echoing through the studio. Several crew members actually stepped backward, and Savannah could see security personnel moving closer to the set. "They deserve to know how corrupt this entire system is, how people like you manipulate information to serve your own agenda." "What agenda would that be exactly?" Savannah asked, her journalistic instincts taking over despite the increasingly volatile situation. "What do you think my agenda is in asking you about your foundation's funding sources?" Harry leaned forward aggressively, pointing his finger directly at her. "Your agenda is to make me look bad, to undermine everything I'm trying to accomplish, to drag my family's name through the mud for ratings. Don't sit there and pretend you don't know exactly what you're doing." The paranoid accusations were becoming more elaborate and disconnected from reality with each passing moment. Savannah realized she was witnessing what appeared to be a complete psychological breakdown on live television, but she also knew she had a responsibility to her viewers to maintain some semblance of professional standards. "Harry, I think you need to take a step back and listen to yourself right now. You're making very serious accusations against me and my colleagues without any evidence whatsoever. That's not fair to anyone, including yourself." "Fair?" Harry's laugh was almost maniacal now. "You want to talk to me about what's fair? Is it fair that my mother died because of people like you? Is it fair that my wife has been tormented by your industry? Is it fair that no matter what we do, no matter how much good we try to accomplish, there's always someone like you waiting to tear us down?" The invocation of his mother's death sent a wave of uncomfortable silence through the studio. Even the most hardened production staff members looked shocked at how quickly and dramatically the situation had deteriorated. Savannah knew she was treading on extremely sensitive ground, But she also couldn't let such inflammatory statements go unchallenged. "Harry, I understand that you've experienced tremendous loss and that media attention has been difficult for your family. But I am not responsible for those tragedies, and neither are my colleagues here at NBC. We're trying to have a professional conversation about your current work, nothing more." Professional conversation? Harry was practically screaming now, spittle flying from his mouth as he gestured wildly. "There's nothing professional about this ambush. There's nothing professional about your entire industry. You're all parasites, feeding off other people's pain and calling it journalism." The personal insults were becoming more vicious and unhinged with each outburst. Savannah could see her producer making urgent hand signals from behind the cameras, clearly indicating that they needed to wrap this up immediately. But she also knew that simply ending the interview abruptly would leave viewers confused and potentially make the situation worse. "Harry, I'm going to ask you one more time to please lower your voice and try to have a civil conversation. Our viewers tuned in to learn about your charitable work, not to watch personal attacks and conspiracy theories." Conspiracy theories? Harry stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the studio floor. "Conspiracy theories? You think my mother's death was a conspiracy theory? You think the harassment my wife has endured is a conspiracy theory? You people are absolutely sickening." The fact that he was now standing and looming over her while shouting created a genuinely intimidating atmosphere. Savannah remained seated, but she could feel her heart rate increasing as the situation became potentially dangerous. Security personnel were now clearly visible at the edges of the set, ready to intervene if necessary. "Nobody said anything about conspiracy theories regarding those tragedies, Harry. You're putting words in my mouth and creating arguments that don't exist. I think you need to sit down and collect yourself. Don't tell me what I need to do." Harry slammed his hand down on the table so hard that both coffee cups jumped and spilled their contents. "I'm not going to sit here and be lectured by someone who makes a living destroying people's lives. You want a story, Savannah? Here's your story. Here's your story, Savannah. You want to know what real corruption looks like? It looks like you sitting in that chair, pretending to be America's sweetheart, while you systematically destroy anyone who threatens your cozy little media empire." The accusation was so absurd and disconnected from reality that even some of the camera operators were shaking their heads in disbelief. Savannah had interviewed presidents, world leaders, and countless celebrities without ever facing such unhinged hostility. She knew this moment would define how she was remembered as a journalist, and she was determined not to let Harry's meltdown diminish her professionalism. "Harry, you need to stop making these wild accusations immediately. You're embarrassing yourself and disrespecting everyone in this studio who works hard to bring honest journalism to our viewers." "Honest journalism?" Harry's voice reached a fever pitch that was probably audible in the building's lobby. "You wouldn't know honest journalism if it slapped you in your fake plastic face? You're nothing but a corporate puppet reading scripts written by executives who care more about advertising revenue than truth." The personal attack on her appearance crossed every line of decency and professionalism. Gasps could be heard from crew members around the studio, and Savannah could see genuine shock and disgust on their faces. Even hardened television professionals who had seen everything were appalled by Harry's behavior. "That is completely unacceptable, and I will not tolerate personal insults on this program," Savannah said firmly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned every ounce of respect in her industry. "You are a guest in our studio, and you will conduct yourself appropriately, or this interview will end immediately." "Oh, now you're threatening me?" Harry laughed maniacally, beginning to pace back and forth behind his chair like a caged animal. The real Savannah Guthrie finally shows her true colors. This is what happens when someone challenges your authority, isn't it? You can't handle being called out for what you really are. "What I really am is a professional journalist, trying to do my job while you have what appears to be a complete breakdown on national television," Savannah replied with devastating calm. "I think our viewers can see exactly what's happening here, and it's not reflecting well on you." The mention of viewers seemed to trigger yet another level of paranoia in Harry's deteriorating mental state. He whipped his head around to stare directly into the nearest camera, his eyes wild and unfocused. "You want to see what's really happening here, America? You want to see how your beloved morning show hosts treat people who dare to speak truth to power? This is your media system. This is your fake, corrupt, disgusting media system that props up people like her while tearing down anyone who threatens their narrative." His direct address to the camera, while completely ignoring Savannah, was the final straw for the production team. She could see her producer making urgent cutting motions with his hands, and security personnel were now moving openly toward the set. But Harry was far from finished with his tirade. "You sit at home every morning drinking your coffee and watching this woman lie to you? You think she cares about informing you? She cares about ratings. She cares about her salary. She cares about maintaining her position in the establishment that keeps people like my family under constant attack. Harry, you need to sit down and stop this right now," Savannah commanded with the authority of someone who had controlled thousands of live television moments. "You are making a fool of yourself on national television, and I'm giving you one last chance to salvage some dignity from this situation." But dignity was apparently the last thing on Harry's mind as he continued his unhinged rant. "Dignity? You want to lecture me about dignity? Where was your dignity when your network was spreading lies about my wife? Where was your dignity when you gave platforms to people who make careers out of attacking my family? I have never given a platform to anyone attacking your family, and you know that," Savannah shot back, her patience finally completely exhausted. "You are creating fictional grievances to justify behavior that is completely unacceptable. Our viewers deserve better than watching a grown man throw a tantrum because he doesn't like being asked basic questions." The word tantrum seemed to hit Harry like a physical blow. His face turned an even deeper shade of red, and his breathing became so labored that several people in the studio looked genuinely concerned about his physical health. "Tantrum? Tantrum? Standing up to media bullies is throwing a tantrum? Fighting back against systematic harassment is having a breakdown? You people are absolutely unbelievable. You destroy lives and then act shocked when someone finally fights back." "Nobody is destroying your life, Harry," Savannah said with the weary patience of someone dealing with an unreasonable child. "I asked you about your charity's funding sources, which is a completely standard question for any public figure involved in charitable work. Your reaction to that basic inquiry has been completely disproportionate and frankly disturbing." "Disturbing?" Harry was now pacing more frantically, his movements becoming increasingly erratic. "I'll tell you what's disturbing. What's disturbing is sitting across from someone who smiles while they stick a knife in your back. What's disturbing is pretending to be America's sweetheart while you systematically undermine anyone who threatens your comfortable little world." The repeated attacks on her character were becoming more personal and vicious with each outburst. Savannah could see that security personnel were now positioned strategically around the set, clearly prepared to intervene physically if necessary. The situation had moved far beyond a difficult interview into potentially dangerous territory. "This interview is over," Savannah announced with finality, looking directly into the camera. "We're going to take a commercial break, and when we return, we'll have weather and traffic updates for your Tuesday morning." But Harry wasn't finished. As production assistants moved toward the set and camera operators began powering down their equipment, he made one final, desperate attempt to maintain control of the situation. "You can cut the cameras, but you can't cut the truth," he screamed, his voice cracking with the strain of his emotional breakdown. "Everyone watching this knows exactly what just happened here. They saw your mask slip. They saw what you really are underneath all that fake niceness." Two security guards finally stepped onto the set, positioning themselves on either side of Harry as production staff began clearing equipment. But even as they gently but firmly guided him away from the interview area, he continued his rant. "This is how they treat people who dare to challenge them. This is your free press, America. Remember this moment. Remember what happened when someone finally told the truth about your precious morning show, darling?" His voice could still be heard echoing through the studio corridors, even after he disappeared from view, leaving behind a stunned production crew and one very composed anchor who had just witnessed 37 seconds that would define her career as the moment she refused to let anyone, regardless of their title or status, compromise the integrity of her program.